Hey everyone, I'm Sam from BioCosplay. In this video I'm going to show you how I started sculpting this Kaiju number 8 mask. I'm going to be using Monster Clay Medium. This is a wax-based clay, and I like to sculpt at the kitchen table because it's right next to the microwave and you can heat this clay up in the microwave and it gets soft. If you heat it too long it'll get all liquidy, but I usually put it in for like a minute at a time until it's the consistency I want. My plan is to sculpt this mask from Kaiju number 8. It's Kaiju number 8 himself. I won't spoil any more than that in case you want to go read it. He looks different in different panels, but I know he's got like kind of like a skull nose situation going on and like some angular eyes. So I'm just going to try to start by bulking up the areas that need it a little bit, getting the clay to stick to my head here. This is a life cast of myself, cast in Ultra Cal, and my life cast is relatively smooth, especially up where the bald cap was, so sometimes the clay doesn't want to stick super well, so I like to get it pretty warm and then kind of smear it on there so that it sticks. Currently I just want to try to get an even layer of clay on here. I know some people will do like little balls of clay and kind of like mush them on in sections like this to try to get an even layer, whatever works. You could also start by just like bulking up the main areas, but I find that sometimes the clay sticks a little easier to the clay, so I like to put an even layer down first. Okay, I've got my layer of clay down, now I can start trying to put in some of the shape. I left the mouth open because his mouth extends all the way to the back of his face, and I'm not really sure how I want to do that yet, so I just left it bare currently, and we'll figure that out later. I might build it up with clay first. We're going to focus on this image for the time being so I can get the eye placement and like this like brow situation in here, and then eventually like this ridge up on the forehead and the horns going on. I'll swap back and forth between some other photos as well to make sure the profile is going to look okay. I know coming off the nose here it needs to be like this. It could be a more of a hard angle, or maybe just be wider. I guess it's not super hard of an angle, but this doesn't have to fit my face exactly, like it's not a prosthetic. I do want it to be roughly lined up with where my eyes are. The nose itself here needs to be wider as well. And I can probably bring the middle out to like here, the sides into here. I just need a little spot at least for my eyes. I can see out of this later. I'm trying to kind of mirror what I'm doing on each side, so I'm not only building up one side at a time. Some people like to do one side all at once and then match it. I'm not super great at that. Symmetry is still pretty tough for me. Anything I can do to help keep that consistent. It's still gonna need some work later to get it to be symmetrical. Try to start building up where the eyebrow is. Sometimes I'll just do like a little snake like that. And then if it looks like it needs to be built out from the face, I'll just stick another lump of clay behind that as well. This is gonna look pretty rough for a while. Eventually, he's gonna look like a Kaiju number 8. That's what I'm telling myself. I need to build out the nose here as well. My nose isn't gonna stick out a bit, so he's got a little scaly man nose. I feel like for me, a lot of the early stages is just sticking globs of clay everywhere that are roughly, sort of, kind of in the shapes I'm wanting them to eventually be. Also still pretty new at sculpting. I'm better at like sculpting foam from a solid block than I am from building up shapes from just mush. I think that's probably why I put a bunch of globs on so I can whittle them away later. I'm just going to keep bulking up this sculpt. I think I will have to connect the nose to the chin, because otherwise I'm concerned that the chin will be too far back. And if I connect it all, then I can make sure that it kind of swoops out like this. Because his chin is definitely sticking out further than the nose. And it's kind of flat where the teeth are. Kind of like curves out for the face, and then back in the nose, and then out at the jaw, it looks like. So go ahead and connect this for now. And maybe I'll cut it out again later. For flat spots, I have this metal kidney bean tool. Good for mushing spots flat, or you can just cut the clay with it. It's very thin. That's a very useful tool to have. You can also like scrape with it. So I will fill in some of these gaps and try to work on the profile a little bit more. Try to make sure this is a little more defined and has those ridges like this. Here's where the sculpt is currently. And at this point, I'll probably start to use the tools a little bit. I have some dental tools like this one, and this wooden tool, and also this little rake tool. So I've used this dental tool to put a line roughly down the center of the face here. I've also started kind of scratching in where I think the teeth might go, just to give me a rough idea of the layout of the mouth. And I'll probably start digging out the nose a little bit. It's supposed to have like a kind of like a skull-like looking nose. It has like a little bit of an overhang at the top. So I'll need to dig that out and make sure there's enough clay there that it's going to cover my nose, but also not so thick that it's like protruding out from the sculpt and looks like a nose on its own. Then with this little rake tool, any of these little lumpy spots where I just mushed clay in here, if I want to get rid of those and kind of even it out, I can just use the serrated end of it and just go over in all different directions and try to even that out. And usually I'll apply pressure if I need the spot to be a little lower or be a little lighter if I want it to stay the same depth where it is, and you can use this to kind of shape as you go. The two different ends are just different shapes for getting into different areas. This is kind of sort of like sanding the clay. And then you can use the non-serrated side to smooth that out more and take out some of the rake lines for now. And then with that I can also see where some of the low spots are. So like you can see there's a little dip here and here. So I would either need to rake that down even more or fill that in. A lot of it up to this point has just been mashing clay into the shape you want it, which I don't really have a specific technique on how to explain how to do that. I just mush it until it looks like the thing. And I still got a ways to go on that because he's got big horns. So I've still got to get the big horns on there at the top and figure out how far out I want the cheeks to be. Try to interpret the art. I think I still got a ways to go building out the cheeks and getting more of the rough shapes in here. So I'm going to keep working on that and then we'll check back in. I've changed the horn on this side a bit. I realized, one, it was a little too far back before, and two, it looks like the eyebrow turns into the horn, like it's one flowing section. Here you can see what it was looking like before and how far back I had it. I think that's just because when I was looking at the pictures on the tablet, I was looking at a side profile and then the front and wasn't really matching the two up, so when I was looking at the front I was like thinking these layers were further back than they were instead of just being segments on one horn. Now I'm going to try to match this side with this horn. I'm filling in the eyes for a couple reasons. I'm getting distracted by just the bare ultra cal, so I'm having a hard time trying to get the shape of the eyes right. And then also, when I eventually cast this, I don't actually need resin to go all the way in here because it'll have some like black mesh behind there. So I can bring the inner eye out to, I don't know, half an inch or less. Not really sure yet, probably less than that. So I'm just stuffing clay in here, and then I have this little dental tool. It's like this little paddle looking thing. So I'm getting in there and just mushing the clay down. I can come back with the other tools when I'm done and smooth it out a bit more. So now that the eye's filled in more, I can see that the shape needs to be changed quite a bit. Right now it's pretty flat down here and then kind of just comes at an angle and then back down, so it's very triangular. And you can see with this eye I changed it so it has a lot more shape. It's rounded here and it has like a S shape at the top. So to fix that, I'm just going to add some more clay. I just warm up the clay until it's very malleable for quickly adding stuff, and then I can just smear it in here. And then to make sure it's still flat on the edge if I want it to be flat, I have a fettling knife, so then I can just take this and cut it into the shape I want. And for some of the parts of this, I might smear on the clay and then let it cool down a bit so it's a little more firm and I can cut through it without distorting it too much. And then for sections like the corner of the eyes, he has like a little pointy bit in the corners of the eyes. So for that, I'm going to use this tool, this Kemper tool. I'm not sure what this tool is exactly. I can put a link to it though. But it's got like this little hook thingy and then this little triangular cutting thingy. So then in the corner of the eye, I can use the little hook, section to kind of dig that out and kind of fiddle with that until it looks like it should. So I'm going to keep smushing on clay and using the fettling knife or whatever this tool is to match this eye shape to this eye shape. I was having some difficulties with the symmetry of the eyes, so I went ahead and just cut a line down roughly what I thought the center of this was with this little triangular tool. And so now I can use one of these fabric measuring tapes and line that up where like the corners of the eyes are, or certain parts of the eyes are, and mark like a little dot on each side so I know where it should be. You could also use a string, or they make sculpting calipers that would probably work pretty good as well, but I don't have those. Here I can mark the corner of the eye, probably needs to come up a little bit over here. So then, once I've got things marked out and I know where things need to be adjusted, I can go on and add more clay or shape it down a little bit. I'm using one of these rake tools. I kind of go like in a crisscross pattern with the serrated part, and then to smooth it out, I'll go with the non-serrated part back over that. And if there's any low areas, I can fill it back in. So I made this skeleton nose shape. I wanted to show you how I did that before I get too far in and forget. So I started out by getting a little bit of clay and then rolling it in my hands until you get like a little clay worm. And then I put one vertically like this, and then on the sides I just put two more worms in a heart shape. So just poke it down at the top, and then depending on how big you want the nostril is how big you make your heart, to a relatively small one, and same for the other side over here. And then to start blending it in here, I just took this little wooden tool with the rounded end here, and I just used that to just push it into the sculpt like this and blend that all the way around. And then once all that was done, I could go back in and take out this center section that was kind of supporting it and helping me form the heart. And then I used my rake to blend that down and make it look like it fit with the rest. And from there, now I can go in with like some little loop tools and start shaping the inside of this and smoothing this out. And if I need to, I can go back in and build up the edges some more. Thought that was a quick, easy way to make a skeleton nose. And then I'll be doing a similar thing with the little clay worms up here at the top of his head where he has these ridges above his eyebrows. I'll just outline them with the little clay worms and blend them in. And that way I can quickly put in some landmarks without having to carve away a bunch or try to sculpt like a full thing. You can just put down a little bit of clay and get like the general shape, so from a distance I can see what it's supposed to look like. For the teeth, they're looking pretty rough right now, but I just wanted to get some teeth on there, so I didn't have just a blank space down here at the bottom. All I've been doing is getting lumps of clay, like just a little ball of clay, and I'll push up on the bottom and then pinch the top in until I've got sort of a rounded over triangle, and I just mush that in there in various sizes. So these definitely aren't perfect and aren't what they're going to look like when I'm done, but this helps me at least visualize what his mouth is supposed to look like a little bit. And then for some of these that are way too thick, I can just go back in with my fettling knife, or if you just have like a box cutter, any sort of blade really, I'll just go in and trim those down a bit. And then if I want those to be more adhered and not just fall off later, I'll smush them down with this wooden tool. I use this wooden tool a lot to blend things in. And I'm going to keep adding the teeth over here until they're all the way back to the back of the jaw like this one. Periodically I like to check the thickness of the clay, and I do that with this just long poking tool. This was just in a small kit of cheap dental tools, and I'll just pick a spot on the sculpt and poke the tool in until I hit the life cast underneath, and then I'll just kind of put my thumb where the depth is. I'm not like super precise about it, and then I'll poke roughly in the same area on the other side, and then I'll usually put my thumb there and go back and forth and see how much thicker one side is than the other and kind of compare. And then that way I know if I need to shave down some material on one side or add some material on another side. I'm getting to a point where I want to start blending in some of these little lumps of clay that have been put on here. Not so much because I'm getting close to the end of the sculpt, but because it helps me visualize it as one cohesive thing instead of a bunch of lumps of clay spread out. You can see I've already done that up here on the forehead and then some down around the nose. So for that, I'm going to use a rake tool. And so then areas like this where there's visibly a chunk of clay stuck on there, first I try to make sure that the edges are blended down. That way I don't start raking and just rip off my piece of clay. And then I usually start with the round side, and you just want to rake in all different directions That way you don't just have like a bunch of trenches going one way and you can get it like evenly knocked down. Also, sometimes I like to just go in a circle. Sometimes I find that to be a little easier and quicker. And as I'm doing that, I can apply different amounts of pressure depending on how much material I want to remove. So for right now, I'm just trying to get it to be a nice consistent surface. Later I could go in and like apply more pressure as I'm raking, like dig out a spot or go super light and barely change how it's shaped. Yeah, you just want to make sure you're going over it in all different directions. Make sure it's getting pretty even. And then it's going to make little clay particles. You can just brush those off. So for this cheek, I know this is a little bit thicker than the other cheek. So as I go over it, I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure on this peak I see here. Try to knock that down more than like the sides right here. And you can always go back and change it later and add clay back if it ends up looking bad. I think don't be afraid to change things when you're sculpting, because you can always put it back. If you want to make a drastic change, you can either like cut a big chunk of clay off your sculpt and set it aside, and you can just put it back on later if you liked it better that way. Then if I want to go back in and smooth this a little more, I'll use the smooth side of the rake tool and just drag it over lightly. It'll catch on all those little ridges and knock those down. You just have to be careful with this that you don't make a bunch of flat spots, because if you put too much pressure, it's very easy to make just a bunch of flat strips all over your sculpt. I'm going to keep doing this and get this to be a consistent surface, and then that'll help me be able to see where I need to add more clay and where more clay needs to be removed. That's going to do it for this video. In part 2, I'll show you how I started adding the details to the mask.